Caitlin Clark is no longer two technical fouls away from a suspension. She is one. One argument, one reaction, one moment when frustration moves faster than judgment. That is all separating the biggest star in the WNBA from an automatic one-game suspension without pay. And after what happened against Connecticut, Indiana can no longer treat this as a distant problem. Late in the third quarter, the Fever were not fighting to survive. They were dominating. Indiana led Connecticut 95-67. Clark brought the ball up the floor. Contact followed. The play stopped. Then Clark and Sania Rivers moved toward each other and exchanged words. The officials gave technical fouls to both players. For Clark, it was number 7. Indiana still finished the night with a 123-88 victory. The Fever set a franchise scoring record. Clark produced 27 points and 11 assists. The basketball result was almost perfect. The emotional result was not. If technical foul number 7 remains on her record, the next one triggers an automatic suspension. That means the next flashpoint does not end with only a free throw and a fine. It can remove Clark from the next game entirely. One missed call in the first quarter, one hard bump during a dead ball, one defender who refuses to step away, one official who believes the conversation has gone too far. That is now enough. And this creates the question Indiana cannot avoid. What is more dangerous for the Fever? A Caitlin Clark who plays with so much fire that one more confrontation could put her in street clothes? Or a Caitlin Clark who is told to cool down so much that she loses the edge that makes her special? That is the conflict at the center of this story. Clark is not great because she is calm every second. She plays with urgency. She sees openings before they fully appear. She attacks defenses before they can organize. She throws passes that look reckless until the ball arrives exactly where it needs to be. She forces defenders to pick her up before she reaches the logo. She turns pressure into speed. She turns anger into confidence. She turns one mistake into a reason to demand the next possession. But that emotional current does not disappear when the whistle blows. Sometimes it becomes a conversation with an official. Sometimes it becomes a reaction to contact she believes was ignored. Sometimes it becomes a direct exchange with an opponent who refuses to give her room. Until now, those moments carried a fine and a warning. The next one can carry a missed game. This is not as simple as saying the officials are against her. It is also not as simple as saying Clark needs to stop complaining. Some of her frustration is understandable. Some of her reactions are part of competitive basketball. Some of her technical fouls have looked avoidable. All three things can be true at the same time. The real question is not whether Clark should lose her emotion. The real question is whether she can control where that emotion goes. Because Indiana does not need a silent Caitlin Clark. Indiana needs an available Caitlin Clark. And for the first time this season, those two ideas are beginning to collide. To understand why this issue is so difficult, you have to understand what the emotion of Caitlin Clark gives Indiana. It does not simply make her louder, it makes the Fever faster. When Clark is fully engaged, the entire floor changes before she even shoots. The primary defender meets her high. The opposing big steps farther from the paint. Weak side defenders lean toward the ball before the action is complete. Everyone is preparing for the same threat. Give Clark space, and she can pull up. Press too high, and she can attack the opening behind the defender. Send a second player, and she can find the teammate the defense just abandoned. Her shooting is the obvious danger. Her control of the defense is the larger one. That control depends on confidence. Clark has to believe the next pass is available. She has to believe the next deep shot is worth taking. She has to believe that one turnover does not change who she is. That belief is emotional. It is also essential. A cautious Clark is easier to defend. A Clark who hesitates gives the defense time to recover. A Clark who stops attacking after contact allows the opponent to decide the terms of the game. Indiana cannot ask her to become that player. The strongest evidence came against Seattle. Clark scored 45 points and added 10 assists in a 110-107 victory. It was the first performance in WNBA history with at least 40 points and 10 assists. Nothing about that night was quiet. Clark attacked the paint. She reached the free throw line. She stretched the defense far beyond the three-point line. When Seattle took away one option, she found another. When the game tightened late, she did not disappear. She demanded more responsibility. She scored 16 points in the fourth quarter. She influenced 17 of the final 19 Indiana points. With the result hanging in the balance, she made the defensive play, found space on the left side, and buried the shot that changed the game. That was emotion with direction. It became concentration. It became execution. It became pressure that Seattle could not escape. That is the version of Clark the Fever need. She does not have to score 45 every night. She does not have to control every possession. But the threat of that version changes the way opponents defend Indiana. Even when Clark scores 17 instead of 45, defenders still react to her before the box score records anything. They extend their coverage. They leave the paint earlier. They hesitate before helping from the corner. That creates room for teammates. It creates cleaner rolls to the basket. It creates better driving lanes. It creates the kind of offensive balance that allowed Indiana to beat New York 108-88 without needing another historic scoring explosion from Clark. This is why a suspension would cost Indiana more than one scorer. The Fever could place another guard in the starting lineup. They could not replace the way Clark changes defensive geometry. Without her, the opposing big can stay closer to the paint. The primary defender does not have to meet the ball at the logo. Passing windows become smaller. Late clock possessions become more difficult. Another teammate has to create under pressure. Another player has to make the final read. Another guard has to absorb the attention Clark normally carries. Indiana has talent. The Fever can still compete without her. But they do not play the same game. Picture the opening possession of a game Clark cannot play. The opponent does not have to send a defender toward the logo. The opposing center can wait closer to the rim. The weak side wing can stay attached to the corner instead of leaning toward Clark. Indiana begins the possession with less space before anyone touches the paint. The first pass becomes harder. The second action becomes slower. The shot clock reaches its final seconds more often because the defense is not forced to make an early choice. That pressure spreads through the lineup. Kelsey Mitchell may see more aggressive help because Clark is not standing one pass away. Aaliyah Boston may receive the ball with another defender closer to the lane. The guards replacing Clark may make the correct read, but they do not force the same level of fear 30 feet from the basket. This does not mean Indiana becomes helpless. It means every advantage becomes more expensive to create. The Fever have to run another action. They have to make another pass. They have to ask another player to win a matchup the defense is now more comfortable accepting. Over one possession, that difference can look small. Over an entire game, it changes everything. It changes who handles pressure. It changes who takes the late shot. It changes how quickly Indiana can move from defense into attack. It changes the decisions every opponent makes before the ball reaches the front court. Now, return to the moment against Connecticut. Indiana was leading by 28 points. The Fever had already created all the energy they needed. The offense was moving. The crowd was engaged. The result was almost decided. That is why the exchange matters more than one free throw. The confrontation offered almost no chance to improve that game, but it created a real chance to damage the next one. Was winning that emotional moment worth changing every possession of a future night? That is not a question about toughness. It is a question about value. A franchise star has two responsibilities: create the advantage, protect the ability to keep creating it. Clark has mastered the first responsibility. The seventh technical foul has placed the second one directly in front of her. That is why the technical foul count matters. This is not only a conversation about behavior. It is a conversation about basketball value. Clark has already proved that her intensity can power elite offense. Now she has to prove that the same intensity will not take her off the floor. 7 technical fouls can look like one simple statistic. They are not. The recent incidents reveal several different sources of frustration. The first is officiating. Defenses know that comfort is dangerous for Clark. They crowd her space. They bump her on cuts. They press into her body before she reaches the three-point line. They reach across her arms on drives and force her to play through contact. That is basketball. It is also exhausting. Clark is asked to create offense, manage pace, recognize traps, protect the ball, and absorb physical pressure while cameras study every reaction on her face. A normal point guard can have a bad moment. Clark has a viral moment. Against New York, she believed contact involving Jonquel Jones should have produced a whistle. Clark reacted toward the official, and the technical came quickly. It was number 6. From the view of Clark, she was demanding an explanation after contact. From the view of the official, the reaction crossed the line. The same moment can produce two completely different interpretations. That does not remove the responsibility of Clark, it increases it. Once the whistle is final, continuing the argument does not restore the possession. It does not return points to the scoreboard. It does not force the official to reverse the decision. It only creates another risk. The second source is competitive confrontation. Earlier in the season, Clark received another technical during a tense game against Phoenix after an exchange involving DeWanna Bonner and a reaction toward the Mercury bench. Clark saw the moment as part of competitive basketball. Many fans agreed. Players talk, benches react. Stars respond after hard contact. Rivalries grow because athletes do not pretend every possession feels the same. The WNBA should not become emotionless. But competitive emotion has an unclear border. A clap can feel harmless to one player and disrespectful to an official. A celebration can energize one bench and provoke the other. A short exchange can become a technical before either player believes something serious happened. That uncertainty is part of the danger. Then came Connecticut. This moment was different because of the score. Indiana led by 28 points. The game did not need another spark. The Fever already had complete control. Clark had every right to compete through contact. She had every right to protect her space. She had every right to believe the physical exchange went too far. But Indiana had almost nothing to gain from the confrontation that followed. That is what made technical foul number 7 feel different. The basketball value of the reaction was almost zero. The future cost could be enormous. Now the environment around Clark has changed. Every opponent knows the number. Every broadcast knows the number. Every fan watching after a whistle knows the number. This does not prove that officials will target her. There is no need to invent a conspiracy. The pressure exists without one. Every exchange will now feel larger because everyone understands what the next technical means. A reaction that might have disappeared earlier in the season can become the biggest story of the night. A quick comment in the first quarter can carry the weight of the next game. A frustrated gesture can become more important than the possession that caused it. Clark is no longer reacting inside a neutral story. She is reacting inside a suspension story. That changes her responsibility. It also changes the way the public judges every moment. If Clark walks toward an official, the conversation immediately becomes about suspension. If she claps after contact, viewers search for the reaction of the referee. If an opponent says something during a dead ball, cameras remain close because everyone expects the next chapter. This level of attention can feel unfair. But attention is now part of the environment she has to manage. The league cannot remove every camera. Opponents will not stop competing. Officials will not ignore behavior simply because the next penalty carries a larger consequence. Clark has to operate inside that reality. That may be the hardest part. She is being asked to make calmer decisions at the exact moment when the pressure around every decision has become louder. The challenge is not only emotional control. It is emotional control while millions of people wait to see whether control disappears. She does not have to become a different person. She does have to understand that the cost has changed. Stephanie White does not want to erase the passion of Caitlin Clark. She understands what that passion gives the Fever. She also understands that some technical fouls are more controllable than others. That distinction matters. Useful emotion helps Clark sprint back after a turnover. Useful emotion helps her demand the ball after a missed shot. Useful emotion helps her attack a trap instead of retreating from it. Useful emotion makes the entire team believe the next possession belongs to Indiana. Expensive emotion gives the opponent a free throw. Now it can do something worse. It can remove Clark from the next game. White is not asking her star to become passive. She is asking Clark to become selective. For most of this debate, the choices have been framed incorrectly. Either Clark keeps her fire and accepts every consequence, or Clark calms down and becomes a softer version of herself. That is a false choice. There is a difference between losing emotion and controlling it. There is a difference between backing down and choosing the right response. There is a difference between trying to win an argument and trying to win the next possession. Imagine Clark takes contact on a drive and does not receive the whistle she expects. She can turn toward the official and continue the conversation. Or she can get the ball again, attack the same coverage, force the big to step higher, and punish the defense with a pass behind the trap. One response tries to change the past, the other attacks the future. That is the leadership test. Clark does not need to stop being angry. She needs to make the defense pay for it. That is not surrender. That is control. A technical foul can occasionally energize a team. A coach may take one to defend a player. A star may show teammates that a certain level of contact will not be accepted. But technical foul number 8 changes the calculation. The cost is no longer limited to the current possession. It changes the next game. It changes the starting lineup. It changes the spacing before the opening tip. It places more pressure on every teammate who suddenly has to create without the player who bends the defense farther than anyone else on the roster. That is why discipline is not weakness in this situation. Discipline is a competitive weapon. The strongest version of Clark is not the player who reacts to everything. It is the player who decides what deserves a reaction. That decision may require only 1 second. Does this help Indiana? Is this worth missing the next game? If the answer is no, walking away is not retreat. Walking away is refusing to let an official, an opponent, or one frustrating moment control her availability. Clark has spent her career trusting instinct. See the opening. Make the pass. Feel the defender leaning. Take the shot. That instinct is part of her freedom. Emotional discipline requires a different skill. It requires a pause before the reaction becomes a consequence, not a long pause. Only enough time to remember that the Fever need more than her anger. They need her presence. This cannot become a story where every responsibility belongs to Caitlin Clark. Indiana has to help. The Fever know how much attention follows every interaction involving their star. They know that the next technical foul carries a larger consequence than the first 7. That means teammates must recognize the moment before it grows. When Clark turns toward an official, someone can pull her toward the huddle. When an opponent steps closer after the whistle, someone can create space. When the frustration is justified, a coach can speak for her. Clark does not have to fight every battle personally. That is not protection from competition. It is smart team management. The Fever also have to maintain honest communication with her. They should not tell Clark that every reaction is wrong. That message would fail because it is not true. Defenses do play her physically. Missed calls do happen. Some emotional moments are completely understandable. But understanding the frustration does not require accepting every response. The team can support her and still demand better decisions. Those ideas are not opposites. The league also carries responsibility. Physical play must be judged consistently from the opening tip to the final minute. Emotional reactions should be evaluated by what actually happened, not by the size of the audience or the reputation of the player involved. If a technical foul is incorrect, the review process should correct it. If the call is upheld, the standard should be clear enough for players to understand where the line stands. Clark cannot control all of that. She cannot control every whistle. She cannot control every defender. She cannot control what the broadcast shows after a dead ball. She can control the second after the whistle. That second may become one of the most important parts of her development. Young stars are often measured by production. Franchise leaders are also measured by availability. Clark already carries enormous responsibility inside the offense. She organizes pace. She creates passing lanes before teammates touch the ball. She pulls defenders away from the paint. She makes ordinary possessions feel urgent because one late rotation can become an open layup or a deep 3. That gives every emotional decision a team cost. If Clark misses a game because of an injury, Indiana accepts an unavoidable problem. If Clark misses a game because one argument continued too long, the feeling is different. One absence may be beyond her control. The other is exactly what she is being asked to control. That is why this moment matters beyond one suspension. It is part of the transition from superstar production to franchise leadership. The next level is not becoming less emotional. The next level is understanding that the team depends on what happens after the emotion arrives. Caitlin Clark should not back down. Not from contact. Not from pressure. Not from defenders who want to turn every possession into a test of patience. Not from the responsibility of carrying an offense that changes when she crosses half court. But refusing to back down does not mean reacting to every challenge. Sometimes the strongest response is making sure nobody can remove you from the next game. That is the answer at the center of this story. Indiana does not need a quieter Caitlin Clark. The WNBA does not need one of its biggest stars to become afraid of emotion. Fans do not want to watch her accept every hit without a response. But protecting her identity does not require protecting every reaction. The fire must serve a purpose. It must push the pace. It must sharpen the next read. It must become the deep shot that stretches the defense. It must become the pass that finds the corner. It must become the sprint back after a turnover. It must become the decision to attack again after the previous possession went wrong. That is where emotion becomes valuable. An argument after the whistle cannot reopen a passing lane. It cannot erase a turnover. It cannot return a missed call. It cannot help Indiana win the next possession. And now one more technical foul can cost the Fever an entire game without the player who shapes almost every part of their offense. That does not mean all 7 technical fouls tell the same story. Some came from frustration that fans could understand. Some came from competitive moments that belong in basketball. Some looked avoidable because the game did not need another confrontation. Technical foul number 7 removed the margin that once existed between emotion and suspension. There is no room left for one harmless mistake. The next reaction carries a different price. The greatest competitors do not stop feeling anger. They learn how to use it. They save it for the next defensive possession. They turn it into a harder cut. They attack the same defender again. They force the opponent to deal with the answer inside the game, where the scoreboard can measure it. Clark has already shown that she can transform pressure into production. She has taken defensive attention that would overwhelm most guards and turned it into space for teammates. She has forced opponents to defend areas of the court they normally ignore. She has delivered historic performances while carrying expectations that follow every possession. That is why Indiana needs her present, not perfect. Present. One more technical foul may still come. Basketball is emotional. Contact is constant. Frustration is inevitable. But the question is no longer whether Clark is tough enough to stand her ground. The question is whether she is disciplined enough to choose when standing her ground actually helps her team. Caitlin Clark should never stop fighting. She simply has to make sure the fight ends with the ball in her hands, not with her watching the next game from the sideline. Do you believe Clark will make it through the regular season without a suspension? Or is one more emotional moment almost impossible to avoid? Stay close, because Caitlin Clark is no longer approaching this test. She is already inside it.